Hello everyone, this is Mark Hoddinott. I was fortunate in May of this year to have an interview with Mr Rick Mahler, who was a juror on the Steven Avery trial back in the early part of 2007. Rick's insights as a juror and his observations of what went on during the course of the trial provide us all with an interesting look behind the scenes. I trust you enjoyed the discussion. So Rick, you may have answered this question already, but I think it's an important one just to be very specific about. And whilst you in particular, were excused from the jury after the first day of deliberations for personal reasons, can you offer an opinion of how, given the evidence presented by the state that Steven Avery was found guilty of murder, but not of mutilation of a corpse, why do you think those two things became opposite?
Well, I think for one, the trading of votes.
So Rick, during the trial itself, when you were either retired at the end of the day or at a lunch break or temporarily out of the room or going to dinner or whatever the circumstances were when you were not in the courtroom, did anyone, be that an individual person or a public official, try by their words or physical presence inappropriately come near the jury members or say anything to them?
None of the law enforcement that I know of approached any jurors. The bailiff was the only person we were supposed to have contact with, but we went to a meal after. I think that was the first day of deliberations, and
was that meal before you started the deliberations, or was it you had some deliberations and then went to dinner?
We were retiring for the day from deliberations. That was the day I left. We had a few hours of deliberation. I think maybe an hour or two.
Yeah.
And then we retired, and a bus took us to the hotel in Chilton, Wisconsin. And but before we went to the hotel, we stopped at a restaurant in Chilton, and that's when the father of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputy, which, like I stated all along, is I didn't realize that he was the father of the father of a Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputy, or that the father of the husband of the wife that was in the Manitowoc County Clerk's office. I didn't know them two were who they were until long after the trial. And anyway, the father of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputy, like I said, which I didn't know at the time, he after his statement, he's guilty as hell in the deliberation room. After he said that, I went to the hotel and we each could have, I think, one drink. I had an old fashioned, which I like occasionally. But anyway, I told him, I was kind of directing it at him because of what he stated in the deliberation room. I kind of directed at him that, man, I'm getting tired of this shit. And then he stated to me, well, if you're tired of it or you're sick of it, why don't you just leave? And I felt that as an insult or intimidation, that he wanted me out of there, because I think he knew that I was gonna base my decision on all the evidence,
and not already prejudged,
right?
Like he
not
appeared
prejudged,
to be.
which I
can
guarantee that he already made his mind up.
So did that conversation that you just described, did that happen after you'd been to dinner?
That was during dinner.
So you said that you went back to the hotel.
Okay, that was after dinner.
So that conversation with him about you'd had enough of this shit or whatever you said, that was after dinner?
That was during dinner.
During dinner. Okay.
So,
So after you had an hour or two of deliberations at the courthouse,
we went to
you went to eat.
Correct.
You had that conversation with him while you were together at dinner.
Correct.
So when you were at dinner itself, whatever restaurant you were in, did you see anyone else who were not part of the jury present in the room with you or around that the jurors could see?
Yes. I'm not sure, but there was a few state patrol guys that were there.
From Calumet?
No.
State patrol.
State patrol
Yes,
is
yes.
basically state. But I do remember Sheriff Poggle coming in.
Yes, well, he came into the room.
He came into the room,
Yes.
which...
do you think everyone would have seen him come in?
Yes, I believe.
And do you believe the jurors would have known who he was?
I'm sure some of the jurors probably knew who he was, but
Yeah.
I mean, I talked to Jerry after the trial, Jerry Buting,
The lawyer for Steven.
and
Yeah.
he stated that one of the things he would have called whoever on, he would have took it to the judge, because according to them, the only people that were supposed to have contact with us were the bailiffs and the state patrol that's guarding the doors and watching that nobody talks to us and stuff. But Sheriff Poggle, according to Jerry, had no
Legitimate reason.
reason to be there. He shouldn't have been there because he was, I guess, part of the case. Or
Yes. So what on reflection, why do you think he would have known that, being a sheriff, that he shouldn't have been there? He would know that,
Right.
No question. So why do you think he stepped into the room? Do you think that was part of the whole, if I can just take words from what you said before, but there's a sense of intimidation going on?
that could possibly be.
Yeah.
I remember also when we did get to the hotel room, we all went down to a room and we watched videos, like movies.
Mm-hmm.
They had videotapes so we could watch a movie, and we were watching old-time movies or something. And that's when I noticed that people were making phone calls to their families. The bailiff was standing next to us, making sure that they weren't talking about the trial or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I decided to call home, and like everyone else was. And that's when
You learned of the motor vehicle accident. Once you'd been to the restaurant, got back to the hotel, watched the movies, made that phone call. Was it that night or was it the next day that you approached Judge Willis, I guess, to be excused? Or did that happen that night or was it the next day?
it happened that night.
Right. What time of night would have this been approximately?
Approximately, it's been a long time. 8, 7, 8.
Okay.
Maybe around, I'm not sure what time we stopped deliberating and what time we got done with lunch, but I'm thinking between 7 and maybe 9 o'clock.
Okay. So that must have been a pretty, difficult decision for you, because not only you were concerned about your daughter's welfare, but you had sat through 6 weeks of trial, you'd formed a view about the guilt or otherwise of the accused, and now you were being forced effectively to make this no-win decision. One was going to be, either way, it's going to be a difficult decision, right? So, when on reflection, many, many years after that now, how do you feel about that decision? Do you think, I can't, it's a pretty difficult question for me to ask you, I think, because I'm not sure how you best answer that. We can only make decisions at the time. But I guess it would be a reasonable question when you've subsequently learned, given what you knew about the deliberations to that point, when you subsequently learned that Steven was found guilty, How did you feel about that, given that you weren't there in the final decision making?
Angry at myself, disappointed in myself, disappointed because the supposed accident that happened wasn't as bad as I figured it would be. When I called home, my wife was frantic, and supposed accident that happened wasn't as bad as I figured it would be. When I called home, my wife was frantic, and she didn't give me any details, which I wish she would have at the time. But she gave me no details. She just said that, I'm all uptight. She was frantic, upset, because she was worried about how she's going to deal with this issue.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't come out and say. All she said that my stepdaughter was in an accident, and that you really need to get home, and
yes,
because she couldn't handle it herself, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's an understandable set of circumstances, right?
And I felt obligated to make sure that everything was okay, but yet I didn't want to leave, but yet it's like...
Could I just ask you this question? When you did leave, notwithstanding the dilemma of that decision, did you still feel there was enough momentum to support? We'll put it this way: were you surprised to learn that he was ultimately found guilty, given that what had happened up to the point of when you left? Did that surprise you, that those 7, well, one of those 7 were you, but that those other 6 not guilty jurors, at least at the beginning, did that surprise you to at that very moment to learn that they've ultimately voted guilty?
Yeah, I couldn't fathom it. I couldn't understand how it went from 7 not guilty to
12 guilty.
Yeah. Because
you needed 12
right
to make it happen.
I didn't understand how that could happen, because...
So I guess this may not be your view, Rick, but I'm just thinking maybe part of what assisted you in making your decision, I mean, the dilemma of going to attend to your family needs, was that perhaps somewhere in the back of your mind you thought, well, there's enough people who think the same way I'm thinking that you'll be fine. Do you think that was in any way part of your thoughts at the time?
No. Because there was still evidence to look at. We had to go through the evidence, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen.
Okay.
So, I mean, I was hoping that they'd get it right, which I felt they didn't. They did not get it right, because based on all the evidence I saw, there was a lot of lack of evidence.
Yes.
I mean, they talked about, Kratz kept talking about the handcuffs and leg irons and stuff, but there was none of Teresa's DNA on that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that had no significant value in the case. And then there was so much other stuff that made no sense to me. I mean, one thing that struck me out about the whole case was when Coburn was talking about the plates, and I mean, that was a big thing that made me question whether he was guilty or not. I mean, that it was a decision. I mean, that pretty much, when you're talking about a plate and you're right in front of it, I mean.
Yeah, so on that issue, because there's quite a significant issue in the whole trial and post-trial. So as a juror, did you feel when he was up there being questioned, the answers that he gave, and listening to that audio recording when he called into dispatch, did you feel that he was standing looking at the car when he was asking about those plates? Is that how you...
Yeah, that's how I interpreted it.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you're calling in oh, what is that plate number? And you're standing in front of it and you're naming it off. And I mean,
Yeah.
it just baffled me how you could be reading a plate number and,
Yeah, so you felt he was looking at the car at the time.
yeah.
Okay.
And his demeanor on the stand was just, I mean, he looked like he was sweating, and he looked like he wasn't being honest, or he's trying to cover up a lot of things
Okay.
on the stand.
So Rick, prior to the trial, there was a lot of pre-trial publicity, especially associated with Brendan Dassey in the year before, where the same prosecutor for Steven, that is Ken Kratz, gave what is arguably a most unethical public statement about the alleged behaviour of both Steven and Brendan. And there was a lot of controversy about the existence of that publicity to prejudice the trial. In other words, it can influence the minds of jurors who might be selected at that point. And when the trial started for Steven, there were 3 other charges still against him. So he started off with 6 charges. 3 of those ultimately got dropped,
Right.
including the sexual assault charge, and ultimately they weren't what Steven was had to face. But that decision not to have to face him only really happened throughout the trial, didn't happen beforehand. So I was just wondering whether you thought as a juror, was that the fact that there's existence of those charges that ultimately were withdrawn, did that in some way, do you think, still existed in the minds of jurors? In other words, do you think the jurors were perceiving Steven Avery, whether you thought he was guilty or not, did you still perceive this as a trial where not only was he being tried for murder and the gun charge and the mutilation of court charge, but he was being tried for rape and for effectively kidnapping. Even though he never actually got ultimately charged with those in terms of the trial, do you feel that those other ones were still part of what was in the heads of jurors?
I think for sure one juror,
Yeah.
because one of the jurors was called out of the jury into a meeting with Jerry Buting, Ken Kratz, and the judge. I guess from what I found out that he, after trial, I found out that he was watching television, and it was Dan, I believe his name was. Yeah, Dan, the foreperson. That he saw Ken Kratz's interview on the news.
Mm-hmm.
They still let him be on the jury after that, after they called him on it.
This is an interview after a particular day of trial, you mean? Or
Well, this was the Ken Kratz's interview on television, where he stated a bunch of stuff. I believe it was about the rape and Brendan Dassey.
Yeah, okay. So that was it. That was in the year before, in the March of the year before. He made those public statements after Brendan had given his so-called confession. Then Ken Kratz got up there and started salaciously giving his version of all the things that had happened.
Right, and I believe that, as I recall, Dan, the foreperson, heard that on the news, and he possibly brought that in the jury room after I left. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I know he was called on it by the judge, the prosecution, and for sure not the prosecution, the defense and the judge.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that the prosecution really didn't give a crap about him hearing Kratz's statement, because that was all about them.
Yeah. Okay. So Rick, I just want to take you back to something you talked earlier about in the deliberation side. I'd had it told to me myself directly that part of in the deliberation room, that those that were kind of had their minds made up had taken the view in terms of their behaviour to other jurors that if they were to find Steven not guilty, that they were effectively saying that the law enforcement had killed Teresa Hallbach, and that if they took that view, they wouldn't want to be living in the town of Manitowoc, be uncomfortable. So that's what I was told directly by some jurors. Is that also something, maybe they're not those the exact words, but was that kind of also something that you've been told about?
Right, yes. As the viewers probably don't know, but myself and Mark talked to this juror, and he stated that he felt intimidated, and I myself felt intimidated by a few of these jurors, and he felt, the juror feels really bad about the decision he made, but he felt that he was going to get more intimidated by law enforcement and other jurors after the trial was over if he wouldn't have made the decisions that he made on the guilty verdict.
So, but Rick, based on the circumstances at the time and your knowledge at the time and all that prevailed at the time, as distinct from now, because we're obviously a lot more informed now than we were back at the time of the trial, do you generally believe that Steven Avery's lawyers did a good job in advocating and supporting their client? Based at the time.
Yeah, my view is that I think they did a great job at presenting their case of what they had. I know a lot of other people don't feel they did their job, but in my opinion, they did a better job of presenting what they did than the prosecution did of presenting their case.
Well, you're the only person relative to anyone else, including myself, that can make a judgment about that, because you sat in the courtroom every day.
Right.
So you saw what was going on. You saw the emotion, the arguments, the whatever they were. So that's why your opinion matters the most here, because you're a juror, and you've just said now that you believe that Steve's defence team did a good job in the circumstances, and certainly did a better one than the prosecution did.
Yeah.
And I guess in many ways that's in evidence by the fact that on that first paper count deliberation we ended up with 7 not guilties. I'm not sure what more a defence team could expect than that.
Yeah, the prosecution, the first, I'd say 3-4 days of the trial, or first week, I don't know how many times I've seen the trailer, because they kept pumping photos of us, or photos of the trailer into our heads. I don't know why, what was so, I imagine that's where they thought, or they believed that everything happened. But I got so sick of seeing Steven's trailer. That's how much they pump photos of that into our heads.
Yeah, and there was no evidence of any DNA evidence at all other than Steven, because he lived there,
right,
of Teresa or Brendan or anything in that trailer.
That baffles me. And then even the key, this mysterious key they found after they shook that bookcase so viciously. Why nothing? I noticed that during the trial. It's like nothing moved. If you shake something furiously, you don't even have to shake things that hard. Something's going to move. Something's going to shift, and nothing did shift. And that was one strike I had against the prosecution's claim that this key fell out of there when nothing else on the bookcase moved.
Yes. What about just if I could focus on that key just for a second. The key was determined to be the backup key, and so there's a couple of issues. Why would there be a backup? Most people keep their backup key somewhere other than with their normal key. So
Yep,
quite
and no DNA.
no DNA on the key at all other than
which
Steven's,
is odd.
right? So, as a juror at the time, did you think that's all a bit strange? This shiny backup key. Why do we even have a backup key as opposed to the main key?
Right.
And why doesn't it, in any event, have someone else's DNA other than Steven Avery's on it? Did that strike you as being odd?
Yeah, it didn't make any sense at all.
Right.
I mean, if Teresa uses key, I mean, even a few times, it would have had her DNA and it would have been mixed.
Yes.
But there was no mix. It was just Steven's, and that was unreal. That's all I can say. It is unreal.